Jethro Ralph Cushell. I'm a member of the great class of 1999, and I currently serve on your Poly Alumni Association board. And on behalf of Poly and our Alumni Association at large, welcome back to campus. And welcome to our 8th annual Alumni Roundtable, which is part of the 2022 Alumni and Reunion Weekend festivities. It's amazing to be back in person. Some of us haven't been here for 30 plus years, I'm hearing, so that's wild. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion here today. But before we get started, I just wanted to recognize a couple of individuals who brought today together. Emily Fisher and Catherine Weiser of the Alumni and Community Relations. Please stand up and be acknowledged and recognized. We did a lot to do this here together. Thank you. And also, fellow alumni board members, please take a stand and be recognized. Thank you for all you do throughout the years for Poly Alumni. Our Poly alumni bring their talents to every sector of society, literally, contributing to the world around us in ways that are both large and small, and fulfilling Poly's vision to foster students or future alumni who will then go on to contribute profoundly to the world as leaders. But before we get started, I just wanted to start with a quick poll. So if you could raise your hand real quick if this applies to you. How many of you consider yourselves to be artists? All right, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. That's about half the room here. Put your hands up if you know someone who considers himself to be an artist. All right, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Put your hands up if you would consider, you would like to consider yourself an artist, but haven't yet. And keep your hands up. Put your hand up if you appreciate artists. And put your hands up if you came for the free breakfast this morning. All right, that's everyone, I think. Yep, that's everyone. So whether we are artists, we know artists, we appreciate artists, or we just came to be in camaraderie, frankly, with fellow alums, this conversation here today could be just another day that you and I spend here in what's now called Founders Hall, or this conversation could have the potential to profoundly change the way we see the arts throughout the course of our lives from here on out. Today we'll hear from some of our talented alumni in the arts as they reflect on their experiences and their challenges over the last 2 years and discuss the new trends that emerged during the pandemic. We'll hear from 3 astonishing alumni artists who will be officially introduced to you shortly. Deborah Brown, class of 73, Christy Stepp, class of 94, and Tania Verafield, the great class of 2000. Our moderator, who will more formally introduce our panelists, is a Poly alum who really needs no introduction. He's a class of 78. You already know him as a former LA Times reporter and arts and entertainment host for KPCC's The Frame. And he's really an inspiring example of the possibility available for all Poly alumni when pursuing your passions with determination and purpose. But before we bring him out, I'd like to just get up real quickly because we've been eating and hanging out today. So stand to your feet. Thank you. Some people say that their body is their art. But one thing is for sure, the way that we move our bodies impacts our creativity and the ways that we take in information. And there are studies to back this up. So if you'll indulge me in standing up and repeating after me. The arts matter. The arts matter. The arts matter. The arts matter. I can't hear you. The arts matter. The arts matter. And that's why we're here. And that's why we're here. So please give a big round of applause and standing ovation for John Horn, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. I think the last time I was on this stage was the prime of Miss Jean Brody in 8th grade. And then maybe a high school dance or 2. So thank you all for coming out. We have a great panel who have traveled here to be with us. So I'm going to bring up, their bios are in the handout, so I'm not going to read their bios. You can Butte all the way here from Eagle Rock, Tania Verafield. We're going to chat for as long as it's interesting, and then we're going to have a chance to hear from all of you, because I'm sure you have some questions as well. But I'm going to start, since it's an alumni event, by talking about Poly itself, and about if there were experiences, teachers, classmates, that maybe either planted a seed or really got you started in the arts career that you pursued. So Debbie, you're closest to me, so you get to go first.
When I was here at Poly from the middle of 8th grade until graduation, and I had a wonderful art teacher, Richard Alonso, who was a gentle person, had a kind of light hand as a pedagogue, and definitely nurtured my interest in art. But just in general, being at Poly was a life-changing experience for me. I think just the academic rigor and seeing the arts in that context definitely gave me the basis for the career that I've had. But I also took classes at PCC with a wonderful artist named Ben Sakaguchi, who also steered me in the right direction. And then I think maybe some people don't know that the Pasadena Art Museum, before Norton Simon bought it, was a contemporary art museum that was an immensely influential place. It was one of the few museums devoted to contemporary art in America at that time. And although it sunsetted, I think in the 70s or early 80s when Norton Simon bailed it out financially, it was an amazing place with the most avant-garde art. It's hard to believe in conservative Pasadena. And then finally, I'll just say that Caltech actually had a small gallery that showed contemporary art called Baxter, which is in Ramo. And I hung out there a lot and met a lot of weirdo artists. As a teenager, it was having that. It was run by the humanities faculty at Caltech briefly before it also closed. There were things in Pasadena in the early 70s and that were influential to me as an artist.
Anna, what about you?
I'd say Poly was absolutely instrumental, pivotal in every way to leading me to the career that I've led.
You guys hear her?
Her microphone's not on.
Is your mic off? Maybe it's back.
You did turn it on. So,
Yeah.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Nope.
No, where's your mic? Maybe it's not.
Okay.
Just, okay.
Hello.
Slide it up.
Can you hear me? I'll just talk louder.
Okay. I want to hear your voice though.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I started in 4th grade, and I was like the kid that nobody knew was there because I didn't talk. I was just quietly in the background, silent. I started in 4th grade, and I swear there were kids at the end of the 4th grade year who didn't actually know that I had joined their class. So, and then in 5th grade, and so 4th grade also was the year that Rebecca Thompson, who started Los Angeles Children's Chorus, and she started at Poly that year too, I think. And so I had her for music class 4th and 5th grade, and we would sing a chorus together. And I was always somehow aware that I was the loudest kid in the room. I wasn't trying to be, that was just me singing. And she was always kind of pulling me out and putting me in different places and then making me sing by myself, and I always got solos and all that stuff. And then we did with Bravaz that the 5th grade year, and they cast me as Dorothy, and I was like, I don't think you guys understand. I don't talk. It was such a choice to put the quietest, shyest child front and center to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. But I found my voice that year.
What grade was that?
5th.
That's amazing.
So, we were in those 2 classrooms down where I think the current music rooms are now for elementary. And we were down in Garland performing. And so that literally started it all. Then 8th grade, it was Sound of Music in Marina. And then it was every single year in high school, I did musicals. And the trio of Tina, Melly, Kirby at the time, Alan Dyer, and Cynthia Grass. I had this tiny personal training center, and by the time I did end up going to university as a music major, I was 5 to 10 years ahead of everybody else in training.
Wow.
On stage. So, I mean, and that just, it was just like a snowball effect for my career going forward. So I would never
maybe the opposite experience where freshman year, I think they encouraged anyone interested in theater to do the musical, and we did Bye Bye Birdie. And as soon as they heard me sing and watched me try to dance, they put me in the very back and told me to mouth the words. And I was like, oh, I guess I don't know how to do that stuff, but I think I'm still okay at the acting part. And then spent, the rest of high school, yes, doing all the straight plays directed by Cynthia and Tina. And they, as Debbie mentioned, the academic rigor, put me on pace to go to Berkeley, but already knowing that I wanted to study drama because that had been my focus while at Poly. I did the classes because they were required, but I really was invested in the type of theater that Cynthia and Tina did, which the plays they chose, I mean, by high school I had done the Kentucky cycle, we did Crimes of the Heart, senior year I played Puck in Midsummer, and it just really set me off on this course of knowing that, I really wanted to pursue all the different types of plays that existed and never to set foot on a musical stage again. Which was the right thing to do, by the way. I don't judge them for having straightened me out in that way.
What you're describing for some people might be an extracurricular, but it ended up being your careers. And one of the things that I think I'd like to ask about is that transformation of doing what some people would consider an extracurricular, an arts class, and then making it your vocation and studying it in school. We had a reunion of my class maybe 15, 20 years ago, and somebody brought a list of the senior projects that we did that year. Did you guys have senior projects? Yeah. It was independent study for a couple of weeks, and somebody brought a list back of what we studied. I spent my senior project at the LA Times, where I subsequently worked for 11 years. And then there were some senior projects that we one person I remember, his name is David Barber, and he did poetry for 2 weeks. And I'm like, great, that's really a serious senior project. Poetry editor of the Atlantic magazine. So it does mean something, but I want to ask about that transition of doing something in high school and that decision to make it not only what you're going to study, but what you're going to do, because that's a big choice and it needs a lot of support from parents who might say you need to do something else. So I'm wondering what that transition was like from what you took from Poly and really decided to make it your vocation. I'll start at the far side this time, Tania.
Yes, that's such a good point. I mean, my passion for the arts that was so cultivated and fostered by Cynthia and Tina was to the total chagrin of my parents, who were like, we sent you to Poly so that you could, be academic and go to a good college. And so I think it really was, excuse me, transformational to have them both as teachers. Like Anna said, just having that kind of support at such a not a super young age, but high school, which is pivotal for different reasons, so many reasons, really led me to know that's what I was going to do before I even went to UC Berkeley. I knew while I was there I was going to study psychology. Again, I needed to show my parents that I was interested in other things. But really I was going for the dramatic arts program that they had, and I ended up not finishing because of 9/11. I just was super spooked to be away from home and decided I wanted to come home. And I came back and I immediately said, well, the good thing about my career path is I don't need a degree. I can start right now. And, of course, again, my parents were so pleased. But I did just that. I took all the confidence that I had from Poly, really, and a little bit of what I had learned at Berkeley, and I immediately set out in the professional world of acting and found representation and started auditioning and got my union card, and my very first movie was opposite Christian Bale, and I was like, this is going to be so easy, and that's how it turned out. No, and it was just great though, because I already felt somehow with the passion of teachers and my own unique drive for it, and just the well-roundedness that Poly offered. I really didn't ever feel like, oh gosh, I should have done more academically, you know? I really felt like I knew everything I needed as far as what I was gonna pursue, and that I could go on from there and be an artist and really just pursue that calling, and somehow have made that work the last 20-something years, which is, you know, not easy to do, but it's something I'm so grateful for, and I wouldn't have it any other way now, even though when I was at Poly, I felt really challenged academically, and I was like, this is so hard, and I just want to be an actor, but I'm so grateful I had that foundation, because I know what hard work is, and I know that if I ever did need to, I have many other things I could study and become brilliant at, and be, you know, another proud alumni, you know, do another roundtable and say, oh, now I'm here as a scientist or whatever, so.
Anna, what about you?
I would add to that it's super important in order to be a well-rounded artist that you don't only know about art. It's everything else that you bring to it goes into that energy. I would say also that I remember more specifically from Tina, but also from Cynthia, that they said if there is, when they're talking about our careers going forward and us, you know, kind of bouncing off of them our ideas of what we wanted to do after we graduated Poly, and they said, if there is anything else that you could possibly do and you know you could be happy doing that, go do it. Anything else, follow that. Because not only is the road hard, you know, and very few of us actually find success in it, it's heartbreaking, it can be heartbreaking. So anyway, that was super important. Also what I learned at Poly, and it's more of an understanding while you're here, and then you don't realize how special it is until you leave. There's an understanding that we are expected to make a difference when we leave here. And as an artist, I felt that it's not a pressure, it's more of a dedication, a responsibility to take what I've got and make it happen. And I think that Poly graduates all over the world now make that clear. And then I would also say, as far as my parents went, I'm sure, my husband has said to me many times, they must have had some doubt at some point that it was actually, you were gonna make it, like it was gonna happen. And I was like, I don't think so. And he was like, they had to have. And I said, well, they did a really good job of hiding it from me because they were 100% in it as I was in it 100%. Because that's really the only way as an artist you're gonna make it. You can't go at 80%, you can't even go 90, you have to go 110. So I've always been super grateful that they went with me on that journey.
Debbie?
I'm intrigued by both of your comments because in some ways they reflect my experience, in some ways they don't. I definitely think having an academic and well-rounded background makes a big difference for an artist, but it doesn't always help you right away. And in this sense, my experience differs from Tania's. When I graduated from here, I went to Yale, and I graduated from Yale in 3 years. So I majored in studio art, but I had very little actual studio experience. I was a liberal arts, in the context of liberal arts, I have a liberal arts degree. And so I graduated from Yale when I was 20 and went to grad school and then got a college teaching job at Carleton College. And I arrived there when I was 21, so I knew nothing. I mean, really, I knew a lot of book learning, but I didn't really know very much about the thing I was teaching as a professor. And it was only when I stayed at Carleton until I got tenure. I was 28, then I resigned and I moved to New York, where I had been teaching in the summers at Yale. And I realized that's when my art education really began. I was so ill-equipped in a sense in having the kind, I compared to somebody who went to RISD or one of the art schools where you're just totally immersed in a studio experience and you're with very ambitious people who are only interested in being successful as artists. I just didn't have that context. I was always surrounded by very different kinds of academic interests from the students, both at Carleton and at Yale. And so I had a rough number of decades in New York. I always had a gallery that showed my work, but just was, either I didn't have the confidence, or it's just taken me decades to get the kind of success that I feel like I have now, which is for a whole bunch of reasons. The art world has conspired to make that happen, partly my own efforts in getting better, but I was definitely laboring under, I was an early bloomer as far as academic stuff, and a late bloomer as an artist, and that's a very weird kind of thing, and the academic stuff has helped me be the artist that I am, who is a very successful artist now in the context of a very competitive environment, but it took me forever to have that happen. And so some of the experience that I had here didn't necessarily prepare me for the kind of art world that I was going to enter when I finally moved to New York.
Did you say, this is mine, this is what I have as an artist, and it's nobody else's? I'll start with you, Debbie.
That is such a good question. It's taken me a really long time to find that voice, I would say within the last 5 years. And so it predated the pandemic, but it coincided with the rise of platforms like Instagram, which allowed this global dissemination on your phone to anyone who is interested in contemporary art. And so people who are the biggest collectors of contemporary art found me. And I had my voice after having labored in the shadow of other people whose work I think I tried to imitate for many years. I think it's only that I found my voice, the platforms existed, the pandemic caused this migration of the art world onto digital platforms.
Because their galleries were open, or?
I think it was partly that they didn't have any money. I mean, they had so much money they couldn't spend it on things in the world, and so they were looking on collectors, which are the total top of the food chain dominators of what happens in the art world now, at least the commercial art world, and that's the art world I'm talking about, which is the serious art world actually too. They coincide. It's like it was a perfect storm that helped somebody like me, who had found her voice, was good at digital media. The global art world is, the art world is really interested in contemporary. The global collecting community is very interested in contemporary art. Everybody was on their phone, on Instagram. All the serious players were on it as a platform. And collectors found me, and they in turn influenced galleries to show my work, and so it was kind of back and forth. So I don't sell directly to people, but I steer them to my galleries, and the whole thing was just this great vortex of algorithms that elevated somebody like me who had found her voice. And it was easy to get that out there.
So you are the pandemic success story.
I'm one of them. I'm a reflection of something that probably happened to a number of other artists.
Yeah. Anna, what about you, about finding your voice before the pandemic hit, and when that happened, and do you remember the moment when you recognized it?
So it was advanced acting class with Cynthia.
Okay.
And I was so good at doing whatever anyone asked me to do. Triple turn, high C, like whatever, I can do it. Just tell me, I'll do it. And it was in this acting class, and the exercise was, take this play, here's your character, every line has to have a verb that you assign to it. And I couldn't do the assignment, just couldn't do it. It's so hard for me. And I finally went to her, and I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And she was like, you decide. It's your choice. You're the one. You decide that. All of it. And I was like, hello. From that moment, I was like, I'm going to decide everything. Everything.
That's a great
So
story.
my directors like me because I'm like, give me a hint to where you want me to go. And then I just go.
And you make it your own. Tania, what about you?
I love that. I love the contrast between both of you. I would say that moment happened for me as a child, and I don't remember it. I started doing theater when I was 5 years old at the Occidental Summer Theater Program, and I have no memory of when there was some establishing of me, just that's who I was. I really don't remember. But what I do know is that I had to find that moment again in the career path of it, because that, as we mentioned very briefly, has its own challenges. And so there were a lot more moments of, I don't know if I can do this. And so I think I actually found it also right before the pandemic. I work in theater, film, and television primarily, and had a really long dry spell from TV, which I didn't really care about. There weren't TV shows that I was dying to be on. And I decided that I wanted to take a break from anything that wasn't theater. I had bought my way into the theater union equity when I moved to New York, because I could do that being a part of the TV and film union, SAG-AFTRA. And so I bought my card, and then I never booked any equity work in New York. And so there was just this moment here in LA where I had the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm gonna tell them I don't want auditions right now. I'm just gonna focus on theater and independent film. That's always been where my heart has been, a lot of Sundance movies. And the day after I told them that, my manager, she called and said, well, you have like a straight to call back for the guy who won Sundance last year. Do you want that? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go. That was part of my plan. I said, do theater and independent film. And so I went to that audition and I got that, and then suddenly I started working.
What was the film?
It was called Miss Purple, and it was by Justin Shawn, who the year before. So, had done Ook, and so, yeah, so I did that, and then I did a random play in a little theater in Hollywood, like a little black box where you're literally walking on the audience's feet, and you're like, sorry. And that show ended up getting picked up for the Kirk Douglas block party the following year, but I had already started working at A Noise Within in East Pasadena, doing union theater there. So by the time that show got picked up at the Kirk Douglas, I had a conflict of Othello, and I had to fight to be able to do both shows, because it was actually possible, calendar speaking. There were just 3 shows I would miss, and I fought. I really sent emails to the artistic directors, and I was like, this is why it works. The union says I have this option. These are the reasons I'm allowed to. You actually have to permit me because you pay me less. I did this whole thing so that I could do these 2 shows. I got no days off. I worked Mondays, which is traditionally the day off in theater. I was learning, I said I wouldn't dance, but I was learning dance moves. I was learning choreography, so it took extra time because I didn't know how to do it. And I made it happen. And I was like, this is it. I'm allowed to stand up for myself and to make this career exactly what I want it to be. And, everyone is a part of my team to make it happen in this way. And so I really, literally found my voice because I had to stand up in such a strong way and really fight for what I wanted.
So a lot of what you do, Tania, is done with others. I mean, you are acting in a collaborative medium. It could be theater, it could be film, it could be television. That means groups of people coming together, which generally didn't happen that much over most of the last 2 years. So I'm wondering, how did you adapt? Were there shows that maybe had isolated pods where people were vaccinated, or were there real serious gaps in when you could and were able to work?
Yeah, so I just want to say, because this brings up a Polly memory, speaking of things that Cynthia or Tina would say, they really promoted the idea of being a part of an ensemble. That was so huge for me when I was here at Polly. Even if I was the lead in a show, we were constantly reminded that we were working as an ensemble and how important it was to make any issues that came up work for everybody. And that has gone with me throughout my theater career. It was really rough. I had gone to Denver to do my first sort of regional show at the Denver Center. It was a world premiere, and I flew back on March 2nd of 2020. And we hadn't read the news because I was in a bubble. We were doing a show. The only news we read were reviews. And I came back, and my boxes hadn't even shipped back yet. And I was sort of unpacking, the few things I brought on the plane. And somebody was like, there's a pandemic. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. So I literally said, I haven't even returned from Denver in my mind, so I can't really get caught up here. And, and then 10 days later, the world shut down. And my first grieving moment was, was that the last play I'll ever do in my life? That was my first, because I don't, I was like, are we all gonna die? I didn't know. So anyway, sorry to be such a downer, but I really didn't know. And the idea of losing theater, which is such a community building experience and which requires you to be in the same room. And so, yeah, at first everything was gone. Theater basically, a lot of the theaters I worked at had shut down. You know, they did not survive the pandemic, the smaller theaters I used to work at. And really I saw a pivot to Zoom. I mean, all the theaters I worked at were like, we're gonna do a play on Zoom. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a disaster in the making. You know, and they had varying degrees of success. Some were pulled off better than others. But one show that did come together was a show for River LA, which is the organization that sort of keeps the LA River going. And they put on a big fundraiser Zoom show, and they did it like a real play. We rehearsed for a month beforehand. We had Mondays off. We had 6 shows a week on Zoom. I did them from my kitchen with a backdrop behind me. And it was the first sort of full experience of doing a play, as close as it could be. And I also, you know, prior to the pandemic, I didn't have any breaks. I was working multiple shows at a time. So this was really my first break, and doing the Zoom show, I met my husband, who's in the back corner, and we had our son, Leo. And that was, to me, that's the great reward of the pandemic. I had time off work to meet
I want
someone.
to make sure I understand that. So he's watching Zoom and then goes in the chat box and it says, who is this actress? Here's my name.
I went in the chat box, so
Okay.
it was a Zoom show, so each actor was in their, you know, their appropriate places, and I'm the one who messaged him. He loves that part of the story,
Wow.
so yes, I reached out to him.
And you raised your hand in response. You did like a wave hand. Very nice.
So that was the first full run of an experience I had doing a show, and obviously very rewarding. And then things just came back a few months ago. I did Anna in the Tropics at A Noise Within, and it was only their second show back, I think, post-pandemic, and it was brutal just to learn to be with people again.
So I saw footage of an upcoming movie last week called Bullet Train. It stars Brad Pitt and a much bigger star, and I'm not kidding, Bad Bunny. Your kids will tell you why Bad Bunny is so huge. How did they film that? Because that must have been filmed during at least, you know, Omicron or Delta.
Yes, so that was one of my first. So the other thing that happened during the pandemic is before this, you would go into a room and meet producers, and you would, you know, do your lines for them and whatever, and audition. And during the pandemic, everything switched to virtual. So all of a sudden, I had to learn how to use a camera and self-tape myself in my kitchen. I used to go to a studio if I needed to do a self-tape for a big audition. I would go to a fancy studio with big lights. Nope, it was me in the kitchen, like, oh, if I move the window that way, the light will stream right. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so one of my first self-tape auditions was for that Brad Pitt movie, Bullet Train. And when I auditioned for it, you know, it basically said, we have tentative shoot dates. It actually was a hilarious story that I even got it, because they said, we have these tentative shoot dates, and the shoot dates came and went, and they had called to see if I was free, and I was like, of course I'm free. It is the pandemic after all, I'm literally sitting at home. And the shoot dates came and went, and nothing happened, and then they reached out again and said, is she still free? And we were like, yeah, she's still free. I'm still free.
To play a little hard to get, let me check my calendar. Yes, I'm free.
Yes. And finally it turned out, of course, with the pandemic, they too had this disruption in their schedule. So I ended up booking it and finding out about it, and like 2 days later having to be in Lancaster or wherever we shot it. And even then, the day I showed up, the Brad Pitt part of the movie, which I wasn't in, I was in a flashback for Bad Bunny, they were shut down because Brad had tested positive for COVID. And so here we were, you know, the B team shooting this other scene, and yes, Bad Bunny, I didn't know who he was. I played his mom. I didn't know. I was like, oh, I should listen to the rap music. amazing that he, I had no idea, but yes, so I'm very excited for that movie to come out, and we'll see.
This was at a convention for movie theater owners, and I texted my youngest son, who's graduating next month, and I said, "Who's Bad Bunny?" He was like, "Are you kidding, Dad? He's there?" Anna, I want to ask you about what you did during the pandemic, because obviously if you're performing, you're not only performing with a company, but you're performing in front of a live audience, or you're not.
Opera generally consists of a cast of at least hundreds, a huge chorus, a massive orchestra, big stage crew, huge set pieces, big audience. I mean, it's a huge, expensive undertaking to do a performance. And so our world was effectively shut down. There was nothing we could do in person. And, to their credit, I have a lot of friends running opera companies all over the world, and they did great, staying relevant and doing what they could and all of that. But for me, for my personal experience of the pandemic, my husband is an ICU physician, so we were getting intel in January from Washington and Italy, and it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying, and we could see what was coming down the pike. So at that point, I kind of didn't really care what was going on with my career, I was already, I'm 46, and for a coloratura soprano to still be performing at 46 is really, usually we're done by now. I'm still kicking, but my career was, starting to do this because vocally we peak at like 35, so that's just a physical thing. But I would say when the pandemic hit, obviously it was very much in our living room because of my husband, but for me personally, I would say that I've basically been hustling since I was 18. I went to college for this, I went to grad school for this, and I immediately hit the ground running, and I've had a manager in New York City, and all over the Met, and all that stuff. And there's no break. You can't, I started to tell my management when I met my husband, I was like, if I want to have a marriage, I should probably be home ever. So I started to build in time at home, and then with the kids, and my daughter traveled with me for years and all that. But the pandemic gave me an excuse. It gave me permission to be home and be fully present for my husband and my children. And as traumatizing as that was for me as an artist, it gave me something I would never, ever have had, ever. So I was able to support my husband mentally and emotionally for 2 years, and we're finally pulling out of that. And I had a 6th grader at home every day and a kindergartner who was going for half days, and I was there. I was even there for the last year of my dog's life. All of this stuff I would have missed or done halfway, like any working mother feels, you're either a mom or a artist, and then I could actually focus on my family, and that was a permission that the pandemic gave me that I'll never forget or regret. And I have a 13-year-old daughter who still wants to be around me. That'll change, I'm sure, but it's an accomplishment, and I think it had something to do with, when she was on break from a virtual class, she'd come find me, we'd play Uno or whatever. But so now coming back from the pandemic, I was for the first time able to go on tour in Japan for 5 weeks. We were let into the country, like 10 of us, literally. I just finished that tour about a month ago, and I have to say, after 2 years of kind of cutting off my arms in that regard, emotionally, it's like being an artist is not something that we do. It's like for me, it's my spirituality. I'm not particularly religious, but the experience of what I do on a stage with the energy exchange between me and an audience, for me, is where God is. So, or whoever. And not to have that for 2 years was, I had other things to think about and other things that were really important to me that I was able to fully realize. But to come back to that after 2 years, I came back from those 5 weeks in Japan, and it has fully taken me a month to get back in my house, in my children's lives, in my kitchen, in my life endeavor. I was like, no, I don't want to go back because of the feeling that I had being back on a stage. I missed it a lot.
That's a beautiful story. Debbie, you talked a little bit about high net worth people who couldn't go off to their private island and instead, rather than look at their bare walls, bought a lot of art. But how did it affect you? I mean, you typically, I suspect, work alone when you're creating your work. How else did it change your creative process of not being able to exhibit in a gallery, or the way you kind of looked at your work and the way you could collaborate with others?
Well, the art world actually got back the commercial gallery world in New York in the summer of 2020. So things they slowed down for, I mean, it definitely was a terrifying time. Like, we live in East Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and my husband has an office near a hospital, and in New York there were 800 people dying a day in early March, and the trailers with the corpses were refrigerated trucks were outside the hospital because they just couldn't handle the volume. So it was definitely like right around us. So it was certainly, I'm sure for everybody, you have your scary stories. We also had our scary stories, but as an artist, since I work alone and I have my own studio, I'm in a warehouse that we own in Brooklyn, and I just, everything on your phone, delete, delete, delete. There were no calendar obligations. I just went in my studio and worked really hard. I took a lot of risks with my work that I had not done before. I was supposed to have a show with the gallery that I show at Gabla, who's in LA and Palm Beach. That was supposed to be in March 2020. It was canceled, which I was dismayed about, but I just kept at really working hard, and quickly the commercial part of the art world that I'm involved with as somebody who's represented by galleries was never dead and resurfaced and actually just charged forward. And so I think because my work had gotten a lot better, because the art world migrated even more toward digital platforms, because rich people didn't have enough other things to spend their money on, because people were occupied looking at their phone for entertainment. Like, I was in the diversity and inclusion mania has also taken over the art world, the sense that we need to be more equitable in what is exhibited in commercial galleries and in museums, allowed those entities to reach back into like old lady art. And so somebody like me who had been around forever, always had shown, my paintings have been made into mosaics for one of the subway stops in New York. I mean, I have had this long career, but I was never in the center of the art world. But now, like, being an older gal is not the kiss of death. Being a black person isn't. Being a trans person isn't. There were always gay men in the art world. That was not a barrier. But there were a lot of excluded groups who now there was a hunger on the part of collectors, galleries, museums, for whatever reasons, to show their work. So that benefited me. And then finally, I would say, there's been an interest in figuration, like representational art. That was always like the total, bottom of the heap of the art world, which was concerned with conceptual art and video art, performance art, and more like cerebral kinds of art. Almost all the decades that I've been in New York, those have always been in the forefront of what's been shown in galleries. All of that began to change in the mid-2000s. Like, younger people and artists of color started representing themselves. Partly this is this context of identity politics, but I think people from maybe backgrounds that are a little bit outside the center have felt that they needed to tell their story through representational images that really narrated their perspective. And so for someone like me who'd always worked with figurative and representational images, suddenly this was like in the center of the art world. So, I mean, I realize I'm talking about a lot of trends and stuff like that, but the art world is just roiled by these things. So Instagram, diversity, inclusion, figuration, I was like, suddenly the spotlight just went to this kind of work, and other people in my situation have also benefited from this meteoric rise from being somebody who was kicked around for a long time to somebody who is like a new face.
I have one last question, and we'll have time for some audience questions, and this is, I guess, for Anna and Tania, picking up on what Debbie was talking about. There wasn't only a pandemic. Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, and that sparked a long overdue and necessary global conversation about systemic racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm wondering, as artists, did it change your thinking about what your priorities are, what you want to do maybe differently going forward, and how you feel about the change and how long it might last to the benefit of people who have historically been excluded from the art world. So I'll start with you, Tania.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that, because that was, when the pandemic started, I dropped off of social media. I felt that I could appreciate the time at home, and I just sort of was watching the news from afar and being devastated every day, but also feeling very distanced from it in a way, in my safe little home. And I didn't actually return to social media or communicating with people until the murder of George Floyd, because it felt that if I was silent at that time, that would bring a message across that was inaccurate, that I somehow didn't care and I was still isolating and not present to what was happening. And I had said something about the pandemic right when it was starting. I had just sort of let everyone know that I wished them well and that we were all about to experience something together, even though we were apart. And so I got back on social media and I immediately started to just take action in any way that I could think of, which all of it felt too small at the time. But in retrospect, again, because of this free time that I suddenly had, I joined the ACLU Pasadena Foothills chapter and became their vice president, and started just finding my voice in that way as well, which when I was younger, I was a very outspoken activist, and I remember getting hushed many times for just being so loud about my beliefs. And it felt like this was the right time to kind of find that younger version of myself and bring her back into the world. And I remembered, because of a lot of the work that I was doing just with different organizations, I did a lot of phone banking and volunteered in a lot of different ways. And I started to remember that when I would come off stage sometimes, there would be like a young Latinx woman or somebody waiting to tell me how much it meant to them to see me up on this stage. And you know, I was trying to think about the people I looked up to when I was younger, and I actually didn't see people who looked like me. I just saw people that were talented, and I wanted to do that, but I never had an experience of saying, oh, there's someone who looks just like me. I never had that. And so I think that's what's changed for me, is that I really want to sort of rededicate myself to remembering that, oh, that's my son, you can hear me, that when I'm doing this thing that I love so much, and for me is this, yes, very spiritual, connective part of myself, that I'm actually also representing people that, you know, whether they're Latinx like me, whether it's a woman, whether it's whoever it is, that they feel that they connect with seeing me up there, that's a part of my purpose. And I felt that was a real reason why, you know, as things are shifting, and they really are, there is room for more voices in the room, so to speak, right now. And that's why I think that show Anna and the Tropics at A Noise Within came back, and it was a fully Latinx cast. And it was interesting because the show I closed in Denver right before the pandemic was fully Latinx with one Black person as well. And those were the 2 times in my entire life that I've been in a work environment where everybody looked like me, or that we were all, you know, BIPOC. And I hope that it continues to sort of go in that direction, and that we don't just have this moment where we said, oh yeah, let's have some diversity, and then it kind of goes back to what it was. I'm really hopeful that the nature of what happened and the way that people really decided to unite over it is something that continues to play out in the way that we have the arts, because that is another really big part of it, you know, and so I'm really hopeful that that continues, but and I hope to continue finding my own voice and being a part of that, so that if it does fall away, I can go, well, listen, these are the things I did to try to keep it going.
That's awesome. And I would just add that art is filtered through our own life experiences. So what we're missing when we cut out a huge group or groups of people is vast. It's mind-blowing how much we're missing if we don't have everybody represented. And so I also echo in my business as well, casting is going places it has never gone before, and it makes me so happy to see. And I actually, back when I was, I guess 18, and I had to decide if I was gonna go Broadway or opera, because the training is very specific and different for the two. And I could have gone either way. And I think my heart kind of was in Broadway, but I saw how Broadway was casting at the time. And I'm half Japanese, and I was like, I don't see anyone in my roles, meaning I'm the ingenue, I'm the lighter voiced soprano, I'm the young girl, I'm whatever. So that's basically, like my friend Kelly O'Hara, like she's blonde and blue-eyed, like that's what they were casting at the time. And I, somehow in the back of my mind, even though I came from this, you know, very liberal, you know, upbringing in Southern California, and how I just felt that that wasn't gonna be that couldn't be my future. So that was one of the reasons why I went opera, because in an operatic cast, you have to fit your voice type. You don't have to look it. So you could have a black father and a Korean mom, and you could be a white kid. It just didn't matter. As long as your voice fits the character, you know, the bad guy has this big bass voice, and the young girl is a high color tour, and that's all that mattered. Strictly speaking, now casting didn't tend the way that it's tending now for other reasons, but it, for me and how I looked, I knew that the path forward was clearer in the opera world for me. That said, when I was asked recently to do a Asians in Opera like podcast, and how it being Asian had affected my career path, I was like, I don't think I can offer very much to that conversation because I don't look Asian. So I wasn't, to my knowledge, not cast because I was Asian. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I actually declined because I didn't think it was, I couldn't represent that fairly. So anyway, I just wanted to add just that much.
We have time maybe for one quick question, but I think our panelists will be around afterward. You can come up to them. Does anybody have a question that wants to be shared? That's okay. Oh, wait, go ahead.
Sure, I went to Poly in the 60s, and there was no art education to speak of, and maybe Debbie, you're a little younger than I am. What was your experience in doing art? I came in a little late, so I may have missed what you said at Poly, and then like you, I became an academic, I went to a very academic school. I went to Bryn Mawr, and which also did not have an art program. I was very artistic, and I wound up becoming a professor instead of an artist. So how did you navigate that?
I talked a little bit about it. I had a much better academic preparation than an artistic one, and I have really been trying to make up for that ever since. But I did go to a school where I could major in art, studio art as an undergraduate, so I did have that. I went to grad school and got an MFA in painting. But excuse me, as I said, I really, being in New York and working over decades there has been my art education, navigating the commercial part of it, but also just working as an artist and having all the contact with my artistic fellows whose studios I visit. There's a lot of, I didn't talk about this side of the practice, but if you're in the art world for a long time, you have friends who are artists, you go to their shows, you go to their studios. It's not just visits from gallerists and collectors, but you're in that's the reason to be in New York, is to be with so many other ambitious, highly talented people, because it makes you better as an artist. You have intimate contact when you do studio visits with them, but also just seeing their work in the more public context. is a huge motivator. I mean, the most ambitious people come to a place like New York to be an artist, whether it's in theater or in music or wherever. So it's sink or swim. I mean, there are trends that go through it, but you have to be really good to survive. It's just there's an exodus because it's just such a hard place to hang in.
But if I could,
Has Holly changed its other?
well, yes, and that's what I was going to say in closing. I think if you look at what's happening in public education, any budget cut, the first thing that goes is arts, and it's a tragedy. Poly has the resources and the commitment, especially now. I think it's really kind of stepped up as years have gone by to support art and arts education, and I think our panel proves the results of that commitment. I've done a number of these panels. This to me has been the most inspiring of all the ones we've done, and I love the fact that there are 3 women, successful artists here, that Poly had a hand in I don't think there's a greater testament to what the school can do than the work that you guys are creating right now. So I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for joining us. Be sure to buy some art from Debbie if you can afford it. You can buy some records from Mom, I suspect, and maybe watch some Sundance movies that Tania has been in, and watch her play Bad Bunny's mom in Bullet Train, coming to theaters later this year. Thank you all very much.